So, let's dive in. So if you recall, last week we kicked off Lent here. And the series we are going to go through this Lenten season is the idea of being in the wilderness. What does it mean when you are in those far-off areas? When you feel so isolated, so alone in these difficult seasons? How are we supposed to navigate those? Why are we there? What are we supposed to do in those times? So last week, we looked at the idea of wilderness as learning. How it is often in these difficult seasons where we grow the most, where we learn the most, where we jump the most in our life and faith. And so this week, we're going to look at the wilderness as a time of challenge. Now, what do I mean by challenge? Do I mean something difficult? Well, kind of. Wilderness times are going to be difficult, yes, but that's not exactly what I mean. Think of challenge more like a test. Now, in a spiritual sense, tests are often what we could think of as temptations. And wilderness times can be especially hard, especially challenging for us to overcome temptations. Now, first, I want to give us a definition of temptation. I would argue that just about every temptation out there is really just us trying to take a shortcut. Think about it. Stealing. The shortcut is just, I don't want to save up for this, I don't want to work extra to try to get it, or whatever it is, so I'm just going to take it. Lying. The shortcut is, I want to look better in the eyes of these people, but I don't necessarily want to take the time to do what it would take to look better, so I'm just going to lie about it. Whether that makes me look better, or lying about someone else to make them look worse, and in turn making me look better. It's a shortcut. Cheating. Cheating on a test. That's a shortcut. I don't want to take the time to study or to put in the work to get what I think is a good grade on this test, so I'm going to cheat. Cheating on your partner. I don't want to take the time into this relationship to make it work, to make it what I need to be, so I'm going to look for it somewhere else. I'm going to take a shortcut. Temptations are shortcuts. Shortcuts that avoid struggle. And they're a way to try to fast track us to something that we think we want. And these shortcuts oftentimes put our values, faith, and even trust in God to the side. So the challenge in wilderness times is, how do we hold fast to these values, to our faith, to our trust in God? So to do that, let's look back again at kind of our main passage this season, Jesus' temptation. So the words will be on the screen. Same passage we read last week. It's Matthew 4. So let's just read through it real quick and we can kind of touch base on it a little bit. The tempter came to him, Jesus, and said, "If you are the Son of God, command these stones to become loaves of bread." But he answered, "It is written, one does not live by bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God." Then the devil took him to the holy city and placed him on a pinnacle of the temple, saying to him, "If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down. For it is written, he will command his angels concerning you, and on their hands they will bear you up so that you will not dash your foot upon the stone." But Jesus said to him, "Again, it is written, do not put the Lord your God to the test." But again, the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and all their splendor. And he said to him, "All of these I will give to you if you fall down and worship me." And Jesus said to him, "Away with you, Satan. For it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve only him." Then the devil left him, and suddenly the angels came to wait on him. Okay, so let's walk through these three temptations as we kind of be on the same page about why they are here, what they... So the first one, turning rocks to bread. This doesn't feel like a sin. It doesn't look like a sin, right? It's making food. So why is it? Well, I would argue it's using God's power for personal gain. It would be Jesus taking this immense power that he has because he's God and using it for his own purposes. Think of the story of Moses in the desert when there's one instance where he's told to strike a rock and water will come out. Great. Another time later, he's told to talk to the rock. Water will come out. And Moses is basically like, that's dumb. I'm going to hit the rock and have water come out again. Taking God's power and using it for his own kind of self-benefit. Also, the shortcut here, I think, is not trusting God. Because if he turned the rocks into bread, this was coming after a long period of fasting. He's really hungry, so that makes sense. He would want food. What was the last verse we read? And the angels came to wait on him. God took care of him. So the shortcut is not relying on God. Using God's power for your own benefit. We're going to see that as a theme today. The second one, toss out the temple. Why is this one a sin? Well, because the shortcut here is forcing something spectacular to make people believe. Jesus' ministry was about creating personal connections with people. And yes, he did use amazing divine power to talk with people, to show people a better way. But think about all of those powers, all of those miracles. They were used to help other people. They were healings. They were providing food. This one would just be a display of power that benefits only Jesus. So again, it's that idea, using God's power for his own benefit and trying to force people to believe by a show of something spectacular. And then lastly, the kingdoms of the world. Why is this one a sin? This was probably the most obvious, kind of easy to wrap our head around, because it's shortcutting Jesus' entire ministry. Jesus did not come this time here to rule. We see that over and over and over again. That's a question that gets brought up to him all the time. He came to show love, came to teach, came to show a different way. There will be a time when Jesus comes and rules, but it wasn't this time. And Satan wanted Jesus to take this one, wanted Jesus to step in and rule a broken world, because there's all sorts of ramifications that would fall out if this had happened. But he didn't. The temptation here was to jump quickly to ruling everyone. And that's not what Jesus did. Wilderness times can be especially hard for us because we're already beat down. We're already low. We're already depressed. So the temptation to take shortcuts can be especially desirable. It can seem especially good. And especially because oftentimes temptations don't necessarily present themselves as bad right out front. Most of the time, they are good things that are shifted just enough to be bad. Think about our passage. What are the things Satan tempted Jesus with? Hey, Jesus, you're hungry, right? Do you need food? Food's good. There's nothing wrong with that. Hey, Jesus, you want people to believe you're Messiah, right? That's a good thing. Hey, Jesus, you want the world, the nations to follow you, right? So you can see how all three of these started with something good and just got shifted just enough to be a shortcut, to be something bad. So the big question becomes, when we're in these wilderness times, you're going to have lots of voices coming at you. How do you know the voice of God? How do you know which voice to trust? Well, luckily Jesus gives us a great answer for this. If we look at John 10, Jesus is telling this kind of parable story. And we'll pick up here in verse 2. The one who enters the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. So in this analogy, Jesus is framing himself as the good shepherd. We're the sheep moving forward. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep hear his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all of his own, he goes ahead of them, and the sheep follow him because they know his voice. So that's the key here. We follow. We know what voice to follow because we know the voice. We've heard it before. One of the best ways to get into this habit is to simply pray. Simply be in the habit of hearing the voice of God, being in dialogue with God, so that when the time comes and you need to hear that voice filtered out through everything, you'll recognize it. So I used to run track, and you would be in these big stadiums, and I was a 400-meter runner, so it was one lap, so you'd be, running around, it was always so funny because I would come into the home stretch, there'd just be this cacophony of noise. You couldn't hear anything. But I could always pick out the voice of my mom. In this massive stadium, that voice came ringing through, always. Because I knew that voice. In this massive arena, I could pick out that singular voice because it's one I heard every single day. So the sheep recognize this voice because they know it. Another big idea in trying to discern what voice is coming at you is, what are they saying? A big key in temptation can be subbing something, things, stuff, for God. Is the voice you're hearing saying, hey, acquire whatever it is, money, influence, fame, security. Once you get that, then you will be satisfied. Then you will achieve God's provision. Well, that should throw up a red flag. Because the opposite of that, and what we should be doing, is knowing our God is sufficient. Knowing our God loves us and trusting that we'll be taken care of. Now, it's not saying we don't go work and such, right? That's not just saying we sit back and do nothing, God takes care of it. But it's saying trust God with what we have. Trust God with where we're going. Don't try to work ourselves up to get this, and this, and then God will love us. That's not the voice of God. I think another massive temptation in wilderness times is simply just the temptation to give up. There's a joke every year that happens around Lent, the idea of like, all right, so what are you giving up for Lent? Well, this year, I'm just giving up. That's a thing every year. But it's a real thing. We talked about last week how sometimes, almost unintentionally, we can volunteer to stay in our wilderness times. Because even though it can be terrible and sad, in some ways it becomes safe. It becomes comfortable. We see the work it would take to pull out of it, and that feels daunting. But you know what? I'm miserable right here, but I know this. What's on the other side of it, I don't know, and that's scary. And that can be a real temptation in the wilderness. So in this case, our shortcut is just simply accepting the sadness of where we are. And the challenge, the opposite of that, becomes, how do we persevere? How do we trust God enough that there is something on the other side of this difficult season, on the other side of this wilderness for us? So we have to understand and learn that no matter what Satan tosses at us, no matter what happens in our lives, we always have a hand pulling us forward, encouraging us to be the best versions of ourselves possible, the versions that we were made to be. So in our wilderness times, what are the biggest temptations for you? What are the biggest areas that are pulling you to take a shortcut? As you saw that picture at the beginning, shortcuts sometimes do get you to a place faster. They also damage a lot along the way. They also cause more harm than benefit. So what is the shortcut that you're living with right now? What is the shortcut that is saying, hey, pull off this way? Especially if you're in wilderness times. Jesus showed us that we don't go into these wilderness times alone. We can be and will be comforted by God, just as Jesus was. The animals came, comforted him. So in what ways does God provide for you? Reflect back on times you were in the wilderness. What small ways during that season was God taking care of you? Was God comforting you? Was God trying to pull you forward out of that time? It can be hard if you are currently in a wilderness season to see it. But if you are, reflect. Think. What is God doing for me today? How can I recognize the voice of Jesus? The voice that is encouraging me to not just stay sitting in this wilderness time, but to get up, to do the work to move forward, do the work to get to that better place. Because when you get into wilderness times, you will always be a different person at the end. And hopefully, that's a better version of yourself. So what is God trying to tell you, trying to say to you, to help you get to be that better version of yourself? Work on recognizing that voice. Practice it now if you are not in a wilderness season, so that when you do get into a wilderness season, you already know that voice. You're not trying to learn it, discern it at that time. God is prepared to walk with us. You never enter wilderness seasons alone. You have people around you. You have your family around you. And I know some people said, well, my family's not super supportive. I don't have a great family. I don't really talk with my family. That's entirely possible. But look around this room. You do have a family. It's sitting right here. You will never walk through the wilderness alone, because you have people to support you. But bigger than that, you have God that supports you. You have God that pulls you through those wilderness times. Sometimes kicking and screaming. But always remember you are not alone. If we can hone in on that voice, the voice of God, trust it wholly, listen to it, let it carry you forward. Let this group be the manifestation of that voice, carrying you forward, supporting you, helping you in any way. Above all, do not give up. Do not give up. Pull through those wilderness times. Join me as we pray.